I move around a lot, just say, if I get to, you kind of really need to use that 5 minutes to go sign because I'm rubbish. Also, they told me not to press the black button, so of course I was going to press it. Just good to know. My name is David, and basically I'm going to talk you through my story and see if there's any learning points I can give you from that. Now, I always forget what comes first. Oh, I had a baby 6 weeks ago. To be fair, my wife had the baby. You might not, if you couldn't figure that one out, you kind of need to find a different line of work. And more than that, because midwives and birth workers have become my favourite types of people, and I was really proud that she was born on the International Day of the Midwife, so that was fantastic. We missed Star Wars Day by half an hour. I was a little gutted about that, but there you go. I wanted to call her Wakanda, if anyone has seen Black Panther, but my wife wasn't having it. Yes, that's Alyssa. What was my point? Oh, my point was, when a child dies, everything changes, and that became really obvious to me when we sat down to talk to our children about the water birth we were going to have at home. And we got this book called Water Baby, and I'll read you the first page. Oliver and Grandma, that's Grandma apparently, grandmas look like that. Oliver and Grandma watched as midwife Sarah listened to the baby's heart. Her special machine worked underwater. Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. And that was the point. My breath caught in my throat and I couldn't go any further. My wife had to take over because the last time, the most significant time I had heard a midwife look for that heartbeat, she didn't find it. And suddenly, what was just a page in a book suddenly became a trigger, taking me right back to that moment, and I couldn't read past that moment. Everything changes. So Grace's waters broke at 41 plus 2, and the thing I want to just get out of the way right at the beginning was that her death had nothing to do with her being post-date. All our children are post-date, 42 plus 5, 42 plus 2, 42 plus 4. That's my wife's normal. Yeah, that is not post-date for my wife. And like we said, every birth is unique, so treat them as if they're unique rather than every woman being the same. I could. With Alana, we had a doctor sit down and say if we didn't induce, we would be killing our child, who is the most vital, energetic, mad child you've ever met. So. Luckily, my wife said, well, you've given me the risks of going post-date, and she refused to say late. She goes, what are the risks of induction? And the doctor didn't know. And she said, well, unless you can give me the facts in a reasoned and scientific manner, I'm going home. We're not stupid. We'll come in every day to be checked, if that'll make you, to be monitored, if that'll make you happy. But I'm going home. And she did. It's my wife. So we had her. Some people... Some people have videos of their children running and being active. This is the only physical media I have of my daughter, Grace. Strong, healthy, my daughter. Oh, go back one. So this is the story, this is how it happened. We had this perfect day. And you know those families you see on social media, they're kind of holding hands and jumping and they bloody perfect, and you just think, off social media. That was us. Yeah, we had the best day as a family possible. My wife, Alana, and I. It was fantastic. We went home. My wife and I had great sex after Alana had gone to bed because, you know. It could not have been a better day. And I went to bed, and I woke up next morning, and Siobhan wasn't there. There was, however, a wet patch. It had nothing to do with the sex. It was just because waters had broken. So I went downstairs, and sex is great. I don't know if you've tried this. It's not bad. I'll do it again. I have recently discovered this thing called contraception. I'm really going to get on that because I'm done. What was my point? Oh yeah, that's right, I went there. So the waters had broken. I went downstairs, she was ironing, as you do while you're having mild contractions, waiting to have a baby. And we called the midwife. Everything was happy. There was a 3-hour gap between the waters breaking and the midwife arriving. And then we went into what I call movie mode. Now, I don't know if you've seen those movies where something dramatic happens and the screen goes to black and it comes up and the scene's moved on a little bit and it goes to black and it comes up and the scene's moved on a little bit. And I went into that. In my memory, this is how I remember the day. My wife was on the sofa, the midwife was trying to find a heartbeat. I was doing up buttons on my daughter's dress. Fade to black. I'm in the kitchen giving my daughter to our au pair, because we're that kind of family, and fade to black comes up. The midwife's going, well, perhaps baby's just hiding. Let's just go and get a scan just to make sure. Fade to black. I'm in the car. The hospital is 5 minutes away. It feels like the longest journey of my life. And I'm thinking, life is tough, but things have a way of working out, so it will be okay. Deep down inside, kind of hiding from the truth I already knew. Fade to black. We're in the sonographer's room, and she says these words. Well, before she said the words, I kind of knew, because I looked at the screen, and for the first time, there was absolutely no movement whatsoever. And one of the takeaways from this is that the moment you know, we know. There's no hiding it. There's no point waiting to get someone else. We know. And she says, I'm sorry. And my wife is crying. Then she said, someone said, because apparently I discovered a few weeks ago that we went and spoke to a couple of consultants afterwards. I've got no memory of that whatsoever. Strange things happen to your brain. And they said, we need to talk about the options. And I'm thinking, what options? The baby's dead. Why is there an option? And I know it's blooming obvious, but in my head, it hadn't occurred to me that the baby then had to come out. I was like, well, of course it has, but it's dead. What else is there to do? We've got to give birth now. And somehow it was a bit of a shock. I know biology. I studied it in university, but somehow this was beyond my ability to comprehend. My wife labours quite steadily, quite slowly. For example, with our first child, right up until birth, the contractions never got closer than 5 minutes apart. So the thought of having a very slow and steady labour with a dead child in your womb wasn't one we could stomach. So we tend to be quite non-interventionist, but we're not silly. If you need intervention, get it. So we decided we would take induction. We went home. I thought, I need my strength. I tried to eat. Every mouthful was like ashes in my mouth, and I got halfway through before I felt like vomiting. And this is something I don't know if you've thought about, but it's something to bear in mind. Those couple of hours at home were awful. That was a couple of hours. Some women have to go home for a couple of days. How do you eat? How do you sleep? How do you do the things you need to do? How do you be rested? We all know the best way to approach a pregnancy is to be rested, to be vital of mind and body. How do you get to that state when you are at home trying to sleep with the corpse, and I make no apology for that word, the corpse of your child in your womb? I don't know if there's any care pathway to help women mitigate the trauma of having to do that on their own. But then we came back, and something wonderful had happened. There was a midwife called Kat, and she'd done this amazing, amazing thing, and she will live in our hearts forever for it. She said, I've read your notes. And she goes, I see that you wanted a water birth. She goes, we've never tried that with a stillbirth, but if you want me to, I'll see if we can get the pool. And she did, and she laboured in the pool, and it made all the difference. In a place where we've had our control, where we've had our power stripped from us, she gave us that much back, and it made all the difference. During labour, the midwives were phenomenal, and they laughed. There was laughter in that room. They laughed with us, they cried with us, and when they sensed it, they left us alone to be with each other, to grieve with each other, and our doula was there as well, and it was the best birth that it could be, given the circumstances. And having listened to Millie speak, I thought I could have called this talk Positive Stillbirth Matters, because it does so much, and having choice given back to us to take that birth and have control over it in the only way we could, to be what made such a difference. Choice matters for women, regardless which end of pregnancy you're at. In the middle of that pregnancy, my wife, this is my wife. In the middle of that pregnancy, she turns to me and she says, I know this child is dead, but I will bring it into the world with all the grace and dignity it deserves. And if it's a girl, her name should be Grace. And she looks at me and said, if that's okay with you. And I'm like, really? Really? But in the middle, I've seen the difference between a natural birth and an induced birth. And I'm like, if you need an induction, get an induction. But if you don't need one, why would you have one? Because personally, I think the difference is horrible. And in the middle of those contractions, she said those words to me and proved to me the warrior woman that she is. And then my daughter was born. Perfect, beautiful in every way except for breath. My wife passed her to me after she'd held her, and I held her, and the problem was she was still warm for my wife. So I thought, this is some kind of joke, it's a cosmic prank, and maybe she's going to breathe, maybe she's going to open her eyes, and I asked her to open her eyes, and I asked her to breathe, and she didn't. And the words for the song, Beautiful Dreamer, Queen of My Soul, came to me, and I sang that to her, and she didn't breathe. My wife had problems with the placenta. In fact, it took another 4 hours to deliver the placenta. They don't tell you about that in antenatal classes. I'm just going to say, as a man, I had no idea that once it was over, that you had to deliver the placenta. Would have been nice to know, just saying. But they were looking after my wife, and I had to dress my daughter. And I thought, well, do I put a nappy on? A dead child doesn't need a nappy, but it's a baby. How can you not put a nappy on? So I put a nappy on, and I dressed her, and I put her in a cold cot. And it is disgusting to me that there are trusts without cold cots, without bereavement suites, without bereavement midwives or bereavement teams in a country that classes itself as a developed country, that calls itself the first world, and yet somehow in a table of 49 countries is slightly under halfway in terms of its stillbirth rate. It's ridiculous. Where are our priorities and our pride, actually? Anyway, we had a cold cot. I put her in the cold cot, and because my wife needed me, I had to turn away and walk away from my child, which is not what a father is meant to do. And to this day, I struggled putting my children to bed, because at some point, I have to turn away and walk away. I struggle saying goodbye to my family when I leave the house, because I have to turn away and walk away. And while I know anything could happen, actually it might not happen. I now know anything could happen. And that fear is ever present in the way I think. In fact, there is research, if you want to look for it, on the epigenetic changes that happen when you receive trauma, meaning that you change, your brain chemistry changes on a fundamental chromosomal level. It's not that everything feels different to you, it's that you are different. When we left the hospital a few days later, we walked hand in hand, and I was looking around, and I noticed my wife was looking around as well, and she went, all the colours are different. I went, they are. Everything's changed. What's that about? It was weird. But we are different. In fact, close your eyes. Go on, I can see you. I can tell if your eyes are closed or not. Close your eyes. You can open them now. It's a bit weird you do everything someone tells you, but it's fine. How did it feel? Sorry? Disorienting. Who said that? I like that one. Disorienting. Anyone else? Was it a bit nerve-wracking? So odd? Dark. Yeah, that happens. Anything else? You're expecting to do something, not quite sure what's going to happen next. What you need to, and now imagine that I've got you to do this as well. So just very quickly, just do it for a second. Put your hands over here while I'm talking. Just really close your ears while I'm talking. And you can stop now. What was that like? What? You can shout. I'll hear you. What? Muffled, so you're not hearing properly. The moment you say to us, we're sorry, or you tell us that our children have died, that is the world we enter into. It's dark, it's disorientating, it's muffled, things stop making sense. So be very careful about the information you try to impart to us, because we're not hearing you properly. we're not understanding properly what you say. And to be honest, we never truly come out of that place. Yeah. I absolutely love comics, and back in the day I used to read a comic called Animal Man. It's fantastic because it was a nobody superhero that this guy called Grant Morrison took, and what was great about him was that he was a family man, and he balanced superheroing with his wife and 2 children. It was fantastic. And about a week after Grace died, I wanted something familiar, and Animal Man had just come back as a comic series. I thought, that's familiar. I picked it up, got a cup of tea, opened it up, and was hit by this, and it turned out in the previous issue, Animal Man's son had died, and this was the morning of the funeral. And whereas once I'd have looked at that and go, oh, the art is so evocative, it's, blah, 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 I was now just reduced to tears, and I looked at his empty hands wanting to hold something, or I know how you mean. And once again, nothing is the same again. I had a point to that, which I'll come back to. But I like this picture because sometimes I feel I could just sit down, I'll just put this up and sit down, because that says everything you really need to say about it. Oh, choice. We talk a lot about choice at the beginning of pregnancy. So we talk about women's rights with abortion and women having choice, and we seem to forget that at the other end of pregnancy, and it's ridiculous. So, for example, I did this talk once, and the next time I did a talk, a consultant came up to me and said, "You've changed the way I practice." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because I come on shift, I look at the board, see a woman's had a stillbirth, and prescribe the drug to inhibit milk supply." Having done a bit of research, we're great researchers, my wife decided to donate milk. Over 3 months, she donated 20 litres of milk for premature babies. And knowing that what was meant for our daughter was contributing to the maintenance and sustenance of other children was one of the most cathartic things. It was hard. It was very hard, and it's not for everyone, but it was so cathartic. Don't you dare take that choice away from us by not even giving us that choice. I just want to talk a little bit about being a man. I've been one for quite a while. And it's, in fact, I know this because I was having a wee the other day. And my 3-year-old came and said, "Daddy, you've got a willy." I was like, "I do have one, yes." She goes, "I haven't got one of those." I said, "That's right." She goes, "Do you like it?" So, well, I'm quite attached to it. You know? She goes, "Does Mummy like it?" I was like, "You can ask her that one yourself when we go downstairs, sweetheart," which she did. To which my wife was, I don't quite know what you mean, sweetheart." She goes, "Yes or no, Mummy?" It was like, fantastic. Before I do talk about being a man, tell me what you see. This one. My face. My pain. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else? Love. Anything else? Skin to skin. In fact, even though the child is dead, it's one of those things you need to do with the child. And we kind of have to break that barrier of thinking the child is dead and putting it in another bracket. I mean, you do, obviously, but our reaction as parents, we still want to do the things you do with a living child. We want to cut the cord. We would love it if you walk in and go, "How is she today?" "Oh, she looks lovely." Or, "I've put a teddy bear with it." Just normalize it. Stillbirth is stillbirth. There's something everyone misses when I show this slide, and it's because we all do this nice thing where we like to think that we're quite inclusive and we're colourblind, and I kind of hate the colourblind thing because you need to see colour in order to speak to its disparities. So don't tell me you're colourblind, that means very little to me. That's a black man holding his child. The Lancet series on stillbirth showed us that in America, for example, stillbirths and, in fact, maternal mortality amongst black women, Native American women and Latino women was twice that of white women. The figures in the UK are also much higher. No one's talking about it. Forget the whole race card that I'm trying to play on you. It's still a group of people who are more likely to die or have their children die, and it's not being focused on. Every audit and report I've read recently has not analysed the problem or the effect. That doesn't make sense to me. Just want to put that out there. There was a very recent survey of medical students in America, and a startlingly high percentage perceived white and black pain differently. Let's leave that there. So coming back to talking about being a man, I often say that men's grief is quite volcanic because we have this idea that we need to be strong. And what that results in is being emotionally unavailable, because men think they have to be the mountain. The problem with mountains, they often formed by volcanoes, and unless a volcano gets an out, it will erupt at some point. And it becomes this thing, how do you be strong and yet be present? Because we're not taught to be present as men. We're not taught that that's a definition of strength. For me, it kind of came out in this way, in that in terms of our mental grief, we were as one. But I was looking at this woman who had sweated and ached and been through pain that I couldn't comprehend, and I needed to somehow. How could I understand my wife's pain without touching the physicality of that somehow? And you'll find that a lot of people, I knew a guy who was a pacifist, and after his child died, just used to go out and get into fights. Needed to find some way to get that out. I remember walking along the road. Well, I'll come to that in a minute. I chose to do something that would make me ache, that would make me sweat, that would cause me a small amount of pain. I didn't think that was going to be there. Just putting that up because through online support, I've met a lot of men who are learning how to emote, how to be open, how to admit that their emotions are important. And it's that's saving their marriages, and saving their mental health in a world where 75% of suicides in the last few years have been male. There is a post-traumatic stress that men have to deal with. There's 15 men, I know, and I've put 15 because that's the amount of people who have lost their children in this country by the time you go to bed tonight. I chose to dig my own daughter's grave. My brother stood with me. I put my back into it, and it took most of the day. I needed to do something. I was able to find that outlet. Many men can't. My wife decided we should go counselling, and I went to support her because I didn't need counselling. And we got there, and I sat through the counselling, and I held her hand, and I nodded because that's what support looks like, nodding. And she, and then the counsellor asked me a question. I was like, "What? Sorry?" And she asked me again, so I answered. And I answered, and I kept going, and I kept going, and it's coming out, and it's coming out. And we were driving home, and I think I'll come again next week. But even despite that, I'm walking along the road, and I had my iPhone on shuffle, and I've got a daughter, so I had Frozen on my phone. And you know my favourite song, the duet? Do you know the duet? I've been searching my whole life to find my old place. And maybe if the party talking or the chocolate fondue, but with you, I found my place. It's something that I've never known before. Love is an open door. See, I love it. Didn't see that coming. Doesn't usually end with applause, that bit. So I'm singing this because I just love it. And those green things that the telephone engineers work on, the big green. And I'm walking past this, and I'm just like, bang! And I bruised my knuckles on this thing, and I just went, shit. I went, oh dear. And I'm really angry. And I had no idea. And I went and got some specialist anger counselling. I'm not really an angry person, but it was there, and it will come out. And why is it that we are so rubbish at dealing with death? And this is why I say don't call it a stillbirth. It's a death. Stillbirth is a lovely medical term which may look right, and it needs to be said. It needs to be represented on your medical forms. Stop using it with parents. Stop using it in society, because the reason it's still a taboo is because, it's stillbirth. It's one of those things. No, it's the death of my child. Memory making is so important. We've got these necklaces. It was great having people go, why don't you get their fingerprints done so that you can get it on necklaces? And this is lovely because it's indented. When I touch it, it's kind of 3D. It feels like I'm holding a hand in a way, and it's something I can grip to. Having photographs there, and they're a charity. Basically, I'm saying it's your duty as gatekeepers at the moment of our biggest inability to think, to go, did you know that this is available for you? This is available for you, that you can use this service, that local to us is this, or there's a funeral home nearby who will do it for, who will, help you with all these arrangements, or it's just good to know somehow in all the time that you've got, you can do that research. And I need to say, actually, I'm going to say two things, and the first may seem quite harsh, and it's that midwives, birth professionals, will live in our hearts as parents for one of two reasons. It's because you're good, or it's because you're shit. There is no in-between in a caring profession. I'm really sorry. Mistakes are fine. We all make mistakes, thank you. The only people who can't make mistakes are pilots, actually. Perhaps surgeons. Mistakes are fine, and we are forgiving of mistakes because we don't want a culture of blame. We want to make sure things don't happen again. We want a culture of learning rather than blame, because every time we as parents hear another story, it just breaks our hearts all over again, what we want. So we're fine, but the other thing I want to say is look after yourselves. You join this profession because you want to see new life and usher it in and enjoy that new life and revel in it. And when that doesn't happen, that's a toll on you as well. So don't think that because you're a professional, you just have to roll with it and get on with it. Find a way to look after yourselves. Your well-being is so important to our well-being. It's interlinked. And there are midwives from our hospital who will live in our hearts forever. My daughter was 3. I'm going to start talking fast because I've only got 5 minutes left. My daughter was just coming up to 3 when it happened. She's not an idiot. She knew mummy was pregnant. We had to involve her in it. I know of people who have said, got older and said to their parents, why didn't you let us be involved? Why didn't you let me see my brother? Why didn't you let me see my sister? There's that greater area that is affected, grandparents, siblings. So our daughter Alana came and met her daughter and became part of it. And there are issues that have come out of that. And we're bombarding her with love bombs and just helping her along the way. But there are so many important things that need to happen for siblings as a result of her involvement. I love it when you make that noise like you're watching fireworks. It's fantastic. There she was, just rubbing my wife's back every time she had a contraction when we were giving birth to Kira. And in the end, when it got to the business end, she needed to concentrate. We got her out the pool, and as she left the room, she said, "Are you sure you're going to be okay without me, Mummy?" And the midwives are in tears. It's like fantastic. Very quickly, this is a comic called The Sandman, and the woman on the left is called Death. She's a personification of death, and in this comic, she's going around collecting the souls. Bernie has managed to live to 15,000, but it's his time to go. And he says, I did okay, didn't I? I got, 15,000 years? That's pretty good. I lived a pretty long time. You lived what anybody gets, Bernie, says Death. You got a lifetime. Nothing, no more, no less. You got a lifetime. And what's important to know is that although we didn't form the memories we wanted to in the way we wanted to, do not think that a womb life is not a life. It's the life we had, and we could talk to her, and we could sing with her. My wife painted her belly with face paints. She was part of our life. We have memories of being pregnant at Peppa Pig Park. She couldn't go on the ride. There you go. We have memories in which she was a part of, and it's very important for women to understand, especially with the guilt that comes in. This is why I talked about sex at the beginning. What happened was that the membranes of the sac, sometimes between the waters breaking and the midwife turning up, the membranes of the sac wrap themselves around the cord and cut off the blood supply, which doesn't happen. But then guilt just rears its ugly head and goes, is it something we did? Was it the sex maybe that pushed the baby into such a position? And suddenly that act of joy was no longer joyful as you worried that you caused your baby's death. But guilt is an overwhelming emotion, and we need to find a way to mitigate that somehow. And a part of that is acknowledging that for the life that that child did have, the womb life, the woman did everything they could to nurture life, and did it well until they weren't allowed to. But it's important to realize the joy in doing a job the best you could. It wasn't your fault. and you had a life, not the life you wanted. Our children stay with us forever. They never leave us. I talked to a woman who was in her 80s. I was telling her about Grace, and she said, my Harry will be 41 this week, and she knew without hesitation they never, ever, ever leave us. And don't ask them to, because I'll just say, sod ya. Yeah, they are part of every breath we take. Have I got time to do a poem? Yeah. I was going to do it anyway, actually. I wrote a spoken word piece. I've actually written two now, because the second one I wrote was because I was speaking at a bereavement study day, and a woman came up to me and she was sobbing, and she said, my husband died 2 years ago, and listening to you speak was the first time I realised that everything I'm feeling is normal. How have you gone for 2 years without doing that? I spoke at a women's conference in Denmark, and I spoke for 20 minutes, and a woman came up to me and said, since my stillbirth, 6 years ago, listening to you talk is the most healing I've been able to do. I spoke for 20 minutes. After 6 years, I spoke in America, and a couple came up to me, and I turned to say hello, and the man hugged me and just wept into my chest for 3 minutes, and his wife said, we lost our son a year ago, and listening to you talk, and he hasn't talked about it, but listening to you talk, it's like he'd been given permission. I had to travel across the Atlantic and speak for 15 minutes to tell someone they could deal with the death of their own child. What are we doing wrong in terms of death? We need to normalize death because it's kind of normal. And with 15 losses happening a day of this style, we're going to need to get better. This poem is, this poem is called I Pause. There was a pause, then a breath. We drove in our car. The hospital wasn't far, but my breathing was shallow and laboured. In my head, I was hoping we soon would be laughing because my daughter was hopping, trying to avoid the Doppler. Then the lady, she scanned us. And the words she was speaking, which were apparently English, suddenly made sense in my head. I'm sorry, she said. Pause. And I breathe. It's the only way to relieve this pressure that's bending my chest and punching my brain. My wife's eyes are tearing as grief is searing a path to her soul, and I'm no longer whole because of my grace-shaped hole. Eyes that will never see, a smile that will never be, friends that will never come round, and you say I have to put her in the ground. Grace. I will say it, that's my daughter's name, and I'll own it and shout it out loud. And I need you to know I have said to my friends that my girl wasn't stillborn, she died. And I'm sorry if talking like this ain't a hit, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it. And I pause, and I breathe. I'm not ashamed of my dead child whose grave I dug and created, and neither should you of your dear beloved, for they lived for a while and we were elated. Before their bodies were laid in a tomb, they had life in a womb incubated. So I celebrate her life and I grieve for her death. I take a drink from my cup. Wait, my 1 week is up? You want me back working? Well, you think I've been shirking when I don't even know who I am? I'll pause and I'll breathe to shout she was real, to uplift my screaming brothers and sisters. We are parents, no doubt. And it needs to be said that the time for the silence has shifted. And the MPs sat and debated. Yes, brave parents spoke, but has my anger abated? Because so many seats there were empty, like my heart when my daughter left me. So screw the taboo. Let's stand up with pride, tell the world of our grief. Because the time for the silence has shifted. Depression and guilt. I'm giving you notice because my eyes are sparkling again. And it's time doctors woke up and the public got broke up because I ain't living in silence no more. See, the quiet inside is too hard to contain. I have to do something. I just can't refrain. So I'll pause and I'll breathe. If my continued oration makes you want to sigh, then remember that over 2,000 babies a year didn't have to die. So to all those grieving whose pain I lift up high, get ready. because here comes my battle cry. I am a parent. And just like my daughter, I pause. And unlike my daughter, I breathe. I pause. And I breathe. I pause. And I breathe. Thank you for your time.